down to business.
That's the nectar of the gods, baby.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the #1 liquid-fueled, liquid-lubricated show on the interwebs. This is the Whiskey Musings broadcast, and I am your Tyler Durden stand-in host, Rick. So tonight's title has to deal with what's the first rule of Fight Club. And for those of you that have seen the movie, you know what the first rule of Fight Club is. You also should know what the second rule of Fight Club is. And both of them happen to be the same. And that's basically that you do not talk about Fight Club. So what is it about this title, and what is my subject going to be tonight? Well, there have been a lot of revelations this week, interesting revelations coming from some things that have popped up in the media, especially with regards to the vaccine, or not the vaccine, but the virus and where it came from. And it's kind of interesting to think about, the topics of discussion, where the information came from, and especially with regards to things that are available to all of us as the public. We can file what's known as Freedom of Information Act requests to gain information out of our government. And as long as it's not something that is pertinent to some specific things, like, anything that's dealing with, say, classified information that hasn't been released yet, or anything of that nature, you can file Freedom of Information Act requests to gain this information, to get this information. So I'm going to cover a little bit about that, and then there's also a couple other things that have popped up during this past week that is kind of interesting as well. So we're just going to discuss a little bit about that, and I'm going to, kind of give you my thoughts about it. But first, before I do that, I need to thank my subscribers, because I do this all the time. I thank my subscribers because, of course, without you, the show wouldn't be available. But, I've been a little remiss. I'm going to have to be honest with you. I've been a little remiss here recently to discuss a possibility that you as subscribers can do to help support the show. And this is the Whiskey Musings store. As soon as I can bring it up here. And basically the Whiskey Musings logo gear store, we have several different options. We've got sweatshirts, we have t-shirts, we've got tank tops. It's getting hot out there. It's turning into summer here in the United States of America, so it would be great if you could go over to the store and pick something up for yourself or a loved one. There's t-shirts, there's tank tops. There's even, sweatpants if you're of a mind to, and leggings. There's cell phone cases, things of that nature. And of course, we still are dealing with the cloth with the face masks. We have the cloth face mask here that has the Whiskey Musings logo on it, as well as the gator over here. So we're still dealing with, the whole coronavirus thing. So you may live in a place where where you may want to pick some of this stuff up. And as Captain Unicorn has just popped into the chat, thank you for watching tonight, he says the gator is awesome, and I have to agree. Not just for the logo, but hey, you know what? Whatever works for you. There's also stickers and in coffee mugs. If you're not interested in any of the clothing, there are a couple of other items in there as well. So I haven't focused on that. I haven't highlighted that, but I would appreciate it. And of course, all the proceeds go to funding the show itself. I don't take a salary or anything like that out of it. It's basically mostly it goes to toward things like the call-in option that I also have not popped up in the last several shows, but I plan on doing it tonight. Let me get back over here. So yes, I appreciate it. I would appreciate it if you could slide on over to the Whiskey Musing store and pick up something for yourself or a loved one. Father's Day is coming. Maybe you have a grad student coming up, even though being a senior this year and last year have been kind of tough, but maybe there's something there you can pick up and give as a gift if you need to. So anyway, I appreciate that. All right. So, couple of really cool things also too before I get into the show itself or into the subject of the show itself. The program that I use to actually do my streaming, I use two things. First one is on my local machine. I use a program called OBS. I think it's Open Broadcasting Software or not Open Broadcaster. There is another. It's either Broadcasting or Broadcaster. I can't remember which because there's actually two different programs. One of them is to do radio broadcasting over the internet out of a group out of Alaska. They're another open source. As anyone who has been on the show or listened to the show before, I am a big fan of open source. But OBS released number 27. And I'm actually running it right now. There are a couple of new features that I think are going to be really, really cool. They're going to be really nice. Hopefully, I'll be able to showcase them, not necessarily tonight, but in future shows. I've got one in particular that is directed specifically for my occasional special co-host, Captain Kirk. I have a special feature for him in particular. And it was actually when I found out about it, that was the first thing I could come into my mind. It'd be like, yes, this is really going to work for him. So I'm looking forward to bringing that up. But the other thing that I have going on for tonight, and hopefully, see if someone gets the chance to call in or decides that they want to, we'll have a chance to fully test it out. But it's I don't know if you've ever seen these little, whenever somebody comes on to some sort of a program, they have this audio visualizer thing that kind of follows their voice. And I've figured out how to do that here. So I'm kind of impressed with myself on that. So hopefully if somebody gets the chance to call in, we'll be able to test that out. Now, the other thing that is, I think, really big news is I've actually been considering setting up a audio only portion of the program. And so I've been testing, I've been playing, not really testing, but I've been playing around with the idea within my head. And there'll be some more coming on that. In particular, I might be looking at expanding from just Saturdays into other times during the week, and also doing live audio streams, not just video on YouTube, trying to expand this, gain a little bit bigger audience. I appreciate the audience that I have, but I definitely would like to expand this and get this bigger. And therefore, I have a request of you, my listeners. And basically what it is if you like the show, if you like the topics, I would appreciate you reaching out to your friends and people that you know and helping me promote the program. Not only support it through the store, but also promote the program for basically for your entertainment. I mean, that's ultimately what this is for your entertainment. All right. So moving into this week. So we've had a couple of really big revelations, and I don't know if you've been watching the news or have been paying attention, or how much the mainstream media is actually covering it. I personally, I don't watch the mainstream media that much because of the fact that they've not proven themselves to be very loyal in the past. Let's say they haven't proven themselves to actually be factual and everything else. They get some things right. I'm not going to deny that, but there are some times where things have popped up, and so that's why I generally tend to use alternative sources of information. We had the whole Project Veritas thing came up not too long ago about how CNN was slanting the news to help Joe Biden get into office, and that kind of stuff. And in the last few weeks honestly. There have been several things that have popped up. I've been waiting a little bit to kind of hear a little more about the information that's coming through. But one big one was done this week, and toward the end of last week as well, where a major news source filed a Freedom of Information Act request and was able to pull Dr. Fauci's emails. Now, why is this significant? Well, realistically, it's significant because of the fact that we have a man who has been essentially touted as being the expert, the subject matter expert on all things virus. And I've got to admit his track record over the course of the last year, he's done a bunch of changing in his thought processes. He's supported some things at some points and not supported things in others. And, I understand the science is changing. I am not going to argue that, because in reality, if anybody really has listened to either my comments on the show with regards to this subject, as limited as they have been, or you've engaged in conversation with me outside of the show, in terms of like friends and family, you'll know that in the beginning, I totally am not arguing any of the activities that were done when this virus first kicked off in late 2019, early 2020. A lot of the actions that our government took, I think, were necessary because of the fact that we didn't have a lot of information about this virus. We didn't have a lot of, data and statistics and analysis to go over with regards to this virus. And some of these emails, which were pulled, I believe, from February until April of that same time frame, they kind of reflect this. Now, the biggest challenge, though, that I have with this is a couple of bits of information and a couple of things that were revealed as a part of these emails. And one of them in particular was the fact that, first of all, that Fauci did have some suspicions and have some internal conversations with regards to the cloth masks. Now, if you'll recall, in the beginning, he was saying, don't do the masks. And the reason why, he later stated, had to deal with the fact that he did not want the masks to be taken away from the healthcare individuals and things like that. He has later since said that he was concerned that there would be a run on them, just like a run on like toilet paper and that kind of stuff. He kind of talked a little bit about that. He was concerned about the PPE for the healthcare professionals. And I can kind of understand that. I get it, again, that in the beginning time, there was a lot of uncertainty. But one thing that kind of got floated out there when there was discussions about where this virus came from, one idea that got floated out there that he literally and completely dismissed was the idea that this virus came from the actual Wuhan laboratory that was originally discussed. Now, if you think back, there were times where the news media actually did talk about it, but pretty soon it was dismissed. It was like considered a conspiracy theory, and they changed the narrative such that they actually even got to the point where if you even discussed the fact or discuss the possibility of a lab leak in Wuhan for where this virus came from, it was completely verboten. In fact, and for those of you that don't speak German, verboten means, you're not supposed to talk about it, or it's kind of like a warning. It's forbidden is the term that I was thinking of. So, the thing about it is, though, is that it was a very real possibility. And these emails that came out, there was discussions about it. There was discussions about the virus. And there was also conversations that happened between Fauci and another couple of scientists that basically started to talk about how they analyzed the virus and that there were parts of the virus that did not appear to be naturally derived, meaning that somebody had messed with the things and created this virus. Now, This is really important only from the standpoint of the, or more than just only, but this is really important from the standpoint of that a lot of the news media, the Fauci himself, there was some suggestion by Trump that maybe it came from Wuhan, came from the lab. But for whatever reason, Fauci kind of dismissed it, said, no, it's naturally occurring, etc. So realistically, it's kind of taking this whole idea of the virus and sort of getting an idea as to where the loyalties, where the individual's mindset was at the time that this was being released and at the time that this was coming out. Now, interesting couple little side tidbits of things that have come out in recent history too, is that Barack Obama and Fauci actually visited that lab while Barack Obama was president. And so, not that I'm trying to gain any correlation or causation off of that, because, it's just interesting that this particular lab has been under investigation before for protocol issues. It has been in the attention of the Americans. The Americans have funded things there, and it's timing, and the timing of the release of the virus, whether it was on purpose or potentially accidental. And right now, it looks like it was an accidental leak. Outside of that, it just brings into question some interesting correlations, and you have to kind of wonder, what is it that these people are trying to suppress, cover up, try and misdirect? There's been studies that have shown that the bat that they kind of focused on for this virus is that there's no colonies within the area, quite a bit of a distance away. And I can't remember the exact number, but I know it was some really long number. It was like 600 to 900 kilometers or something like that was the closest known natural occurring bat colony. There's also been some other studies that have since come out that people have actually gotten a hold of the bat that they tried to attribute this to, and they were looking for signs that the virus was naturally occurring within the bats. To my knowledge, at this point, the studies have shown that none of this has shown up. So all of this, even though it is circumstantial, realistically, it's leaning toward the potential of a actual lab link. Now, as a part of these emails, you do see some information that has come out that the Wuhan lab is actually engaged in what's called gain of function research. And basically what that means is they take a virus that could be naturally occurring, but they take that virus and they try to enhance it. They try to make it worse. It is essentially bioengineering a biological weapon, is the idea behind what they're doing here in this lab. And you can check, you can find sources that are out there that do show that this lab has had some challenges in the past. And what's interesting is that as a part of the emails, and honestly, if you've never watched Dan Bongino before, I highly recommend you watch his episode on this, because he actually brings up a lot of these points and a lot of this information he has as a part of it. So I would suggest that you take a look at that. The thing is, though, that this particular lab has been in trouble before. This particular lab is doing gain of function research, and it appears that American companies, American organizations have actually been funding this. Now, why is all of this important? Well, I mean, first of all, it's important mainly because of the fact that we really do need to know, first of all, where this thing came from. Because if it was naturally occurring, then, all well and good, okay. But if it's not, it's kind of just like in a way, I kind of equate it to like the election process. whether or not the election, this past election, was being able to be overturned, meaning that there was enough votes to actually overturn the election, honestly doesn't really matter, because to be honest right now, I mean, everything's all settled. There is no process, as far as I'm aware, within the Constitution as to how to roll this back outside of the ones that are in there, like the 25th Amendment and etc. So there really is no path backwards to, like, get rid of the current president and vice president and have a re-election. That may be the only way to do it, but it would have to be settled based on a court decision in terms of what's going on with this. But doing a post-mortem, going back, and that's a bad word choice there, but going back and taking a look and figuring out how this occurred in order to try and prevent it from happening in the future, and especially in the case of something like a lab leak, this is something that needs to happen. So why you have to ask yourself the question, first of all, who's trying to cover up this information? Who's trying to prevent this from getting loose? And secondly, if these people succeed, then how are we going to know that this particular situation has been rectified? Or is it just going to go away and be kind of like Jeffrey Epstein, where he just sort of killed himself, maybe, quote unquote, and everything's just disappeared? So we have to keep in mind that we should try and keep some of this stuff at the forefront. We should try to keep in mind that this information is, while not relevant necessarily to the present situation, it is relevant to do that background look, to look back on it and figure out exactly why and how this came out. Because if you think about this, we've been shut down in some states, completely shut down for several months. In other states, we've had, some months, and now some states are back open. Some states are only partially open. We've had things like, children being out of school and going to distance learning right away. I mean, our entire lives, not only just America, but the entire world, has been upended because of a mistake. And I think it would behoove us to go back and take a look at this. Now, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there are some people in the government, in some senators and some primarily Republicans, I'm going to say. I don't know 100% if any Democrats have jumped in, but the news media seems to be pushing the fact that these are Republicans that are asking for it. They're asking for a commission and an investigation as to what Fauci knew, when he knew it. He's been up talking to the Senate. In fact, Senator Rand Paul has had some very, very interesting sparrings at the hearings, or at the committees, committee level with Fauci. And these are very interesting and telling things when you wrap them all together into one big deal. Now, there is one thing, and I'm not going to take credit for this, but there is one thing that came out of Fauci's emails and the release of it as part of the Freedom of Information Act. The one thing is that there is a gentleman who apparently thanked Fauci for the fact that Fauci kind of downplayed the Wuhan leak theory. And he thanked him in the email. And just prior to that, the day prior, was a press conference that Fauci attended, and he basically was saying that no, it's not possible. We've got studies that show that this is naturally occurring. The whole lab leak theory is over and done with. But that particular individual was actually integral in the paper. First of all, the paper that was written and potentially presented by Fauci, and Fauci kind of pointed the press toward it. But he also was a interesting figure in the fact that another communication between Fauci and him got redacted. Now, the interesting part of that redaction is the fact of not the redaction itself, because obviously we can't see what's been redacted. However, the footnote that they throw on the redaction is the fact that there is a ongoing investigation, and that's the reason why the redaction happened. Now, you have to kind of ask yourself, wait a minute, if there's an ongoing investigation into conversations between Fauci and this other gentleman, what is this information? What is it about this that somebody obviously is interested in terms of the investigation itself? And yet we can't go and we can't ask these questions because, as I pointed out in the beginning, you're not supposed to talk about this. I mean, this is not supposed to be something that is being talked about. And in fact, it has been squelched for several months, if not almost a full year, from the time that it first came out. And now the press is sort of warming up to the idea that, hey, maybe this didn't actually get created in standard nature, that potentially this thing could have come from the lab, when during the entire time prior to this, they were, oh, that Wuhan, it's a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy theory. You don't need to worry about that. That's conspiracy. That's crap. This is naturally occurring. So you have to kind of wonder and think about why is this going on? What's happening here? Now, granted, we don't have all the information, but my guess is that there's probably some kind of research that's going on. It's happening over in China because it's not something that we would necessarily do over here in the States. And its potential, because of its tie to gain of function research, that it could potentially be tied to some sort of a biological agent that might be attempting to be developed. Now, I'm not saying that there's any nefarious reason for that biological agent to be developed. The medical research is there, and, gain of understanding of these kinds of things, that's what medical research is for. But it does seem a little odd that this is happening. It's happening in a lab that has been visited and funded by American companies, has been visited by a former sitting president of the United States. And, it just kind of is interesting as to what's going on and what potentially could be going on with these emails that have been leaked. So this isn't the only thing, though, that has popped up. This isn't the only thing in the last week and a half or so that's come out of essentially possible conspiracy theories. For those of you who look to the stars and look to the skies, now all of a sudden the United States government has decided to declassify some documents about UFOs, and that they're now sort of accepting the fact that UFOs do exist. Now, why is this interesting? Well, because for the longest period of time, the United States government has fairly devoutly said that UFOs don't exist, that the UFOs, or the whole idea of space aliens, is not possible. And while I sort of agree with that kind of thought process, maybe because, there really isn't any proof one way or the other at this point. And in fact, there's supposed to be a report that's going to be released fairly soon that sort of delves into that, where it's not proven that it's man-made, but it's not proven that it's extraterrestrial in any way, shape, or form. But what is interesting is the timing of the release of this report. And again, keep in mind that these are things that are occurring now when people are starting to ask questions about, for an example, our current president's son. Now, there were some communications and things that were going on. There are some things out there in public view that indicate that there was a laptop taken by the FBI from a New York, I believe it was an Apple store, but from a New York store that reportedly belonged to Hunter Biden. Now, Hunter Biden has sort of shifted off of view. He's not really been in the, it isn't he's sort of shifted from public eye. But there's been a lot of conversation about Hunter Biden and a lot of conversation about his laptop. And yet now we have all of these UFO reports coming out to sort of get people to, I guess, in a way, sort of distract them potentially. And I'm only offering it as a possibility. I'm not saying that that's absolutely correct. But it just seems sort of odd in terms of the timing of it. I mean, right when, the Hunter Biden laptop started spooling up in the news media, all of a sudden we've got this, oh, the U.S. is releasing, UFO documents. Now, Kirk actually brings up, why is it always a thermal image? And actually, I have an explanation, or at least somebody had come up with an explanation on that. First of all, the reason why is because of the fact that the imaging systems, and this is really kind of strange, but the imaging systems on the equipment that was being used at the time, in this particular case, it could be fighter jets or whatever, the imaging systems, the standard video systems in that, have a hard time tracking something that's moving that fast. And so that part of the reason, or the suggestion, is that the thermal imaging, because of the nature of thermal imaging, it's actually easier to capture things that are moving quickly with a thermal image rather than that of a standard visual image. Now, I don't know. I am not a technological expert in video to understand that. But it does seem a little odd to me that, yes, they are always thermal images. They're always grainy. There's nothing there. I mean, we can take a satellite and supposedly pick out a license plate on the Earth and be able to read that license plate, but yet we don't have the same technology to be able to get a hold of these UFOs. Now, keep in mind, UFOs are unidentified flying objects. They do not necessarily need to be extraterrestrial. They can be just something that we just we haven't been able to identify. And potentially it can be something that is man-made. I mean, Area 51 has been a really big push for, I don't know how long people have tried to get into it. They've tried to go there, and there's, plenty of videos out on the internet that demonstrate people trying to get into Area 51 because they believe that, little green men are there. And there are some strange occurrences. We've got plenty of things in our past, like Roswell and that kind of thing. But the interesting thing about it is that now the U.S. government, who has continually denied interacting with these things, has now produced evidence that there is a possibility that there is extraterrestrials that are visiting this world. Now, again, it could be something simple. It could be something like, I don't know, maybe some foreign entity, foreign meaning outside of the U.S., that is testing new technologies. If so, that should also kind of scare you at the same time, because if you have a foreign entity that is not, let's say, wants to use it for nefarious purposes, okay, they eventually might not, you might not want them to have this technology. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, we've had instances, things like the U-2 spy planes that we developed, the whole nuclear project that we had. All of these started as projects that were secrets and that were hidden from the world, and then we were able to unveil them and develop them. So maybe this UFO thing could very well be something along those lines. So, as far as that is concerned, I mean, it's going to be interesting. This is a very interesting time, because for the first time, like I said, the government is actually acknowledging that UFOs do exist and that there are some things that we do not understand and we haven't been able to figure out. What I am kind of waiting on, though, is for that footage, footage to surface, of Bigfoot coming out of the woods. I'm waiting for that. Okay. So I kind of hinted at it here in just a second ago in regards to Hunter Biden's laptop. And granted, it's not a big revelation over the course of this time, but tying it into things like the child trafficking or the human trafficking episode I did a couple of weeks back. I'm keeping an eye for newer information about this laptop. Now, apparently, it's been in the FBI's hands for quite some time, and honestly, whatever happens to be on it, is I've been hearing rumors that it could be very damaging, very sexually explicit, very scary, that kind of thing. And honestly, I mean, a lot of people are like, well, what does this matter? How does this matter? Well, this matters a lot when it comes to the sitting president of the United States. And the reason being is because a lot of people went through, and I'll be honest with you, I mean, phone call with Trump was a big thing with Ukraine. Trump was accused of basically doing a quid pro quo. And the funny thing is that people kind of glossed over is the fact that while Trump, may or may not have done this, he supposedly did it on a phone call. And there was a supposed transcript that came out of it. And I'm not going to try and verify any veracity of the transcript. However, and by the way, he was impeached for this. Okay, we cannot forget that. There was an entire thing where he was impeached because of this supposed phone call that doesn't have a transcript, or at least not a full transcript. What we do have, though, is we do have public video of Joe Biden doing exactly that with the quid pro quo. And the thing about it is with that is the idea that he basically told the Ukraine that he was withholding aid money from America unless the prosecutor got fired. Now, I mean, I'm sorry. If you do anything, one of the things you should never do is you should never admit to it. But he actually not only admitted to it, but he also made it sound like he was proud of that fact. Like he was kind of surprised that it happened, but he sort of paraded it out there. Now, one thing that a lot of people may not remember, they may not remember at all about Joe Biden is that he actually ran for president a couple of other times. And the two other times that he ran, especially at the time in 1988, when he ran for president in 88, he actually got called out for doing things like plagiarism. And, he copied an entire speech from, I believe it was from somebody over in Great Britain. And he basically almost did it word for word. Now, the news media covered this incredibly so in 1988. And you can find video of it out there. And it was supposed to get rid of him. I mean, there were people that Newsweek in particular, there was a reporter from Newsweek, and she literally said, she's like, this should be the end of Biden. But for whatever reason, he's still around. So, now you have, and again, a lot of this is kind of circumstantial evidence. But the thing about it is that, that along with his claim that he got the Ukraine person fired and withheld money at first in order to do that. And then you have this whole Hunter Biden laptop thing. There's past history there that kind of gives you an indication that some of this stuff could very well be true. And so you kind of have to sit back and sort of wonder what in the heck is going on to where, this kind of scenario. And again, it's sort of like in the way the Wuhan leak, the UFOs. I mean, they're all sort of, we don't really have enough information, but it appears that there is some problems with what's going on. And so as Americans, as, citizens of this country, we should stand up. We should ask questions. We should question our government. We should question the people within our government. We need to be able to do that. It doesn't matter whether they're whether they're Democrat, Republican, Independent, doesn't make any difference. These are the people that we are asking to represent us, not only within our borders, but also throughout the world. And if there is something strange that is going on that potentially could be a problem with our governance, with what's out there, then we really should know. We should know the truth. We should understand what the truth is. And, if in the case of like the Wuhan laboratory, if it leaked accidentally, if it leaked on purpose, that would be even worse. But if it were leaked accidentally, then we need to know, how did it happen and what is the lab doing in order to prevent that kind of thing from happening? And even better yet, if there are other labs like this throughout the world, what are those labs doing to prevent a leak like this? Because also, there was one other thing that came out within the last couple of weeks that I think a lot of people didn't know, is the fact that apparently a couple of the, we've now been told that a couple of the doctors that were performing this research at the lab actually checked into the hospitals back in September, October timeframe, just before the outbreak, with a illness that nobody could explain and nobody could understand. So it stands to reason that it's potentially that incident that was what caused this entire global pandemic. But we really need to understand what happened. We need to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And if we're funding this research, there's no reason why we can't ask for that kind of accounting. If the American people are funding it, we need to have that kind of accounting. We need to understand what's going on there. Even though it is happening over in China, we still need to understand who knew, what they knew, and when they knew it. Because if this is something that happens again, we could have a serious problem. And again, just the timing of everything, whether it was in the emails or the timing of, Fauci was on a interview program where he talked about President Trump was going to face a pandemic within the next 18 months. And it's sort of interesting that he would make that statement now knowing, when you look back on it, now knowing of his interaction, not only with the lab, but with the entities that funded not necessarily the gain of research function necessarily, but they did provide money and backing to this particular lab. So it just seems kind of weird. There's a lot of oddities that are going on. And Captain Kirk popped in and said, historically, governments won't admit fault. Looking at Chernobyl as an example, and you are absolutely correct. You are absolutely correct. Governments won't admit fault on anything. And unfortunately, this is something that we need to be aware of. And we may not ever actually gain anything out of it. Okay. So I am going to pop up the phone number now. And eventually, if I actually enact my audio portion of the program, audio only portion of the program, I will actually have to get used to reading out the number on the air so that people can actually call in and that kind of stuff. But until then, you have it up there on the screen. So if you feel inclined to discuss a little bit about this, or even something you might want to talk about, please feel free. Go ahead and give us a call. That being said, though, we have a lot of information, and there's a lot of stuff out there, and we're never really too sure of what to believe. But I'm going to be completely honest with you. The mainstream media, again, and I know I've kind of picked on them in the past, and I'm going to do it again, only just because of the fact that they're kind of low-hanging fruit in a way. But the mainstream media are really failing us. And so going and getting alternative sources, and especially today in this information age where we can go and get alternative sources and alternative places of information, is just absolutely amazing. And here's an example. So I don't know if anybody's been kind of watching This is a little off the topic in terms of where it is, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. So I don't know if anybody's really been watching the whole Portland, Oregon. I grew up down there, and so I'm kind of keeping an eye on that situation down there. But apparently, they've been having riots, if not every single night, almost every single night. I still have family that lives in that area, and one of the things that has come out of that is a journalist by the name of Andy Ngo, and his last name is spelled NGO. He's been doing a lot of work uncovering Antifa and Antifa's dealings with the police and what they stand for and so on and so forth. He's been doing a lot of undercover work down there. And here recently, he and his family have come under a lot of death threats. He himself has been threatened. He's been beaten up probably, I don't know, 2, maybe 3 times now. He is doing an incredible amount of work to expose the hypocrisy of this particular organization. And one of the things that I think is kind of interesting in terms of today's day and age is that over time, and unfortunately, this might actually be a lesson. I mean, unlike Watergate, as an example, and for those of you that are too young to remember Watergate, you should probably look it up. But that was basically the incident that resulted in the resignation of President Nixon before he got impeached. But the thing about Watergate is Watergate was able to kind of be covered up because of the fact that we didn't have all of this availability of information. And so in some ways, I think the availability of information that we have and the ability for a resource who is not part of the mainstream media to be able to go and find information and gain information and be able to put it out there, I think has been sort of a double-edged sword. It brings us to where we have a plethora of information to pick from, so we don't know what's right and what's true and correct. But we also have that plethora of information that we wouldn't have had in the past. And so I think this is part of the conundrum that we deal with in terms of being able to do this. Now, how does this work with the whole idea of, you can't talk about Fight Club? Well, part of it has to deal with the censorship that we're dealing with in terms of the not only the mainstream media not wanting to talk about it, but you also have, big tech not wanting to talk about it. Now, interestingly enough, as a part of those Fauci emails, there was a conversation between him and supposedly Mark Zuckerberg's email account. And there isn't a lot of information in there, but Mark Zuckerberg did say that that Facebook was going to put together a COVID information section. And as a part of that information section, he wanted to make sure, I guess, that he was getting the right information or whatever. But there's a part of it that got redacted only because of the fact that I guess whether this was actually Mark Zuckerberg or not, I don't know. There is no information other than the fact that it appears to be from his email address. But that being said, it appears that Zuckerberg actually gave away some confidential information, some intellectual property, and as a part of that email. And so that part was redacted as a part of the Freedom of Information Act request. So it's kind of interesting, though, that you have this connection between Fauci and the organizations that he worked for, this lab, and the fact that the lab itself was doing gain-of-function research on coronaviruses, and that this gain-of-function research may have resulted in the lab leak. But then we have him who, he potentially could have been part of this whole string of information. We don't know for sure if there's any other information out there about his involvement, but he was then brought in as the subject matter expert as a part of the government organization. I'm picking on the Republicans on this too. I mean, this isn't just Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden came in, he sort of inherited this in a way. So this very well could fall on Trump's shoulders. And if it does, it does. But the whole idea that this man who has been touted as being the one with all of the information about this has been shown to repeatedly contradict himself, change the information, not give us the full story, etc., etc. And so usually the concept goes where there's smoke, there's fire. And so it's kind of interesting about how this one individual is where a lot of this stuff is revolved around. And so if you have the opportunity to take a look at the news media, to go and explore a little bit. You know, I'm not gonna deny that COVID happened. I'm not gonna deny that people died. We have plenty of evidence of that. There are some questions, though, in terms of the methodology and how it was handled, what was effective, what was not effective. We've got several pieces and studies that are out there that indicate that masks were not effective. There's also indications that masks were effective. There's indications that this particular virus sort of took the place of the flu as a part of the PCR testing. And so there's a lot of things that are going on, and I get it. Within the first 3 months, that was a problem, but after that, we started having some time to be able to take a breath and get some research and figure out what the heck is going on. If this thing ends up blowing up and becomes a huge scandal, this is probably one of the biggest scandals to hit the American government and realistically the world, in my mind, than there has been in probably 20, 40 years at least. I mean, this could even go back farther than some of the other scandals. I mean, we had some other conspiracy theories and that kind of stuff about different things, but this one's actually kind of turning into one that very well could be actually true, and that some of the people who've been touting that this was a Wuhan lab leak from many, many months ago, even with, up to a year ago, that this potentially could be a huge scandal for the U.S. government as a whole, and especially the the CDC and the WHO. I mean, I don't even really want to get involved with the WHO because I don't have that amount of time to really dive into it. But even like the WHO organization has had some missteps along the way. And so it really makes it interesting and really pushes the buttons to try and figure out who do we actually, not meaning WHO, the World Health Organization, but who do we actually believe? Who do we really want to look forward to? Because if Fauci was brought in, just as an example, if he was brought in as the world's leading expert on coronaviruses and their development and everything else, and he failed, is there any culpability there? Is there anything that could be said or could be done to not necessarily him directly, but because of his decisions and how the handling of this entire thing was going on? And then you have to ask yourself questions about like the ferociousness of the virus. Is it really as bad as what the CDC and everybody else has touted? Because there are some questions. There are some things that are out there, and I'm not a medical doctor. I'm definitely not a medical doctor. But there are plenty of medical doctors that are actually refuting some of the information that was being presented on this whole thing. We got to go back. We got to take a look. We've got to do a postmortem. We've got to figure out what happened, when it happened, do a what they call in the service an after action review. And I think these Fauci emails are the beginning of that. I think we as a whole, as a people, the government, whoever is involved here, needs to go back and make a post-mortem and after-action look at what happened, who knew it, when they knew it, and of course, what, if anything, can we do to prevent it in the future. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my final Whiskey Musings thought. Thank you very much for joining. If you like this show, if you like the product and the content that I'm bringing to you, please take a minute, hit the subscribe button. Definitely hit the bell to be notified when I go live or when I upload new videos. Keep in mind, I am still working. I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to do an expansion on this. I'm kind of excited about it. I think I know where I'm going to go with it. So keep an eye out. There might be some changes. There might be some audio options, not just the Saturday night broadcast. But anyway, have a great weekend. Thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next time on the Whiskey Musings broadcast. Good night.